G'day fellas. Let's see if I can work out this thing. Yeah. So I've been brushing up on DaVinci Resolve, trying to remember how to edit. And it's not going very well, but you know, I got a title card. Woohoo! And I printed out a 3D clapperboard, which I haven't learnt how to use properly yet. We'll see that later in the video. That'll be fun. Keep your eye out. So I didn't actually record the sketching of this, but I basically copied a sample that I still have, that I made like 25 years ago when I was still in class doing my trade. And if I remember correctly, I made this style to fit the last that I'd gotten from work at the time. The only thing I can really tell you about that last was called AVS last. Other than that, it was a pretty ordinary last. Anyway, so that last was a pretty good basic last to make a basketball shoe on, or a sneaker, or just about any sort of men's and women's shoes. Very generic, but a good generic last. And that was kind of where I was at when I made this pattern. Is I'd started to realize that, you know, all the sketches that I'd done back in high school were moderately useless, because you can't, or you can, but it's not good to just transfer one pattern onto a different last. You know, for best results, you really need to sort of zone into your last and feel its character and make uppers on your last to that character. So the last that we're making this shoe on is the one that I've made from scratch, and I'm very suspect of it. I haven't had a shoe that I can wear yet, so I can't technically swear by it. I think there's a few problems with it, but at the moment it's what I've got to work with. I can't keep printing new lasts every week. They're kind of expensive. So anyway, as we can see, cutting patterns is all about cutting stuff. So there's a lot of this, and basically all I'm doing is just cutting some windows out. So I've got a template, and I'm actually trying to clean up my rough sketch. As you can see, a lot of my lines are pretty fat and chunky and a bit sort of sloppy. So yeah, I'm using my cutting to sort of neaten that up a little bit as I go, and I'm planning a little bit as to what pieces I might do. So we'll speed this up a heck of a lot, because, you know, this is what pattern cutting is. It's cutting. You cut stuff. You spend all day generating teeny tiny little bits of cardboard. Let's speed this up, come on. And we have to speed this up because you guys are going to lapse into a coma, and if you don't, I will, because there's like 7 hours worth of this footage. So yeah, we cut windows. Can we go any faster? And so at this stage, these windows are cut on one side of the line that I intend to use, because every time you duplicate and draw this pattern out, you're gonna be off the mark by sometimes as much as a millimeter. It depends. As you can see, I'm using a mechanical pencil, and they're more accurate than the old wooden pencils, but you can do it with a wooden pencil. You don't need a mechanical pencil. It's just easier. So here I'm starting to cut out the first templates, and I do templates mainly because I'm out of practice. I'm not 100% sure, and honestly you're often not 100% sure exactly how you're going to make a pattern unless you're making a very generic pattern, and this is very much not generic. But this part is, it's just, you know, get a mudguard round your plug on your vamp, and my knife's gone blunt and I've torn my paper, which frustrates me, makes me look like a chump. But yeah, and I'll just test and see that the general shape matches the general shape of the last. Just trim it up. These patterns are probably not going to be the final patterns, so I'm not worried about too much accuracy. And so here I'm thinking about the vamp, and because it's just a straight mudguard on this vamp, I can basically straighten this mudguard right out into just a strip of leather, which is good. It gives me the benefit that when I stitch the upper together, it's going to fit the last and be very easy to last over. You're going to have no extra material, because your vamp is well, it's a shaped vamp basically. But the convention is to have these things look more like a boomerang or a banana, which is why you can see I'm going through this intermediate stage of springing it nice and carefully, little sprung steps here to just make sure that length that I'm straightening out is relatively accurate, and it is. I think we lost a bit of footage there, but yeah, moving on to the next piece. This is the first part of the quarter, which is incorporated into the vamp. I think this technically makes this an Oxford style construction, because the quarter is, no, that's not right. Oxford's, the quarter should go under the vamp. Yeah, the quarter sort of goes over the vamp, so this is probably still an Oxford, a derby, sorry, not an Oxford. But anyway, so we cut our templates out and we do our mirrored cutting so that we get left and rights for free. And this goes on and on and on. So, 30 minutes in, and we're starting to cut the first pieces. Unlike most of the other shoes, this is sort of in my unconscious memory a lot more. So yeah, I'm sort of working a little bit faster in some ways because yeah, I'm really familiar with this thing. Can we go any faster? So pieces like this, we've got the lasting allowance at the bottom and the rest of it is all underlays. It's this piece here. They don't have to be very accurate at all. You really, as long as your marking and alignment points are spot on, the rest can be very rough. And as this job goes on, my hands get tireder and tireder and my cutting gets rougher and rougher. But we're still cooking with gas here. I put an allowance for the back seam. I do want to put a back strap on this back seam, which this one doesn't end up getting. I don't have any webbed tape on hand to actually use like I did in the original. And yeah, I spent too much time 3D modeling other stuff, so I cut that corner out just to save time and get it made. I guess the big difference between me cutting this stuff out and what I've seen how other people cut is that I stick my index finger out, and I'm using that as a guide. It stabilizes the blade, and it also gives you a pivot point to curve your cuts around. It's a much better way of holding the blade. Whereas I see a lot of people holding their blades like pencils, basically. Sorry, I'm just checking, make sure that vamp fits well. What am I doing here? This is the lining for the vamp. So your linings always need to be smaller than your upper. It's just a rule of thumb. If you keep that in mind, your linings will go a lot better. And I cut a little bit extra off of the lining on the lasting allowance too, because you want the lining to stick under your feather line to your lasting board, but you don't want to stick your upper to your lining, which is the real reason that we cut our linings short. We're making our back lining. Again, this big line here looks like I'm cutting a big chunk out of the lining, and I am, but it's a calculated chunk. I know that this lining is very stretchy, thus it's very forgiving, so making this a simple fold line will give me a very tight, neat backlining inside against your foot, which is what we want. This lining also doesn't need super accurate cutting around the top line. If you notice, there's about a 5mm trim off allowance placed all around this one, which you know, especially with stretchy materials for linings, is important. And then we're basically finished, and what did we do there? We basically finished and aligned everything up and just tried to check to make sure that all our bits still fit. It's a bit of a redundant step, but it's a good habit. If you've missed something, you'll probably notice it here. And what are we doing? Scene 4, yes, scene 4. I think we need to make the tongue pattern. So I just gather these up so we don't lose them. We just put them aside. I think we pull out a new piece of card. We get a center line established. And this is the best way to make any sort of symmetrical pattern, and it's even a good way to start non-symmetrical patterns. Scoring the edge just makes it really accurate and neat. You're not going to get a big ugly fold and crease. So what are we doing here? Right, we're doing the tongue, and so just like we did with the vamp mudguard, we're going to spring this down. And you know, the tongue really doesn't have to be very accurate at all. I could just take a measurement by rights and do it by eye, but this is a little bit more accurate, and you know, it's not much more effort. Once you sort of practice at it, you just sort of whip it in. And here I've whipped out my bendy ruler, which almost never gets used, by the way, to just measure it and check, and of course I've measured it incorrectly and then fixed my measurement up. So I was only out by like 2mm. So you can see why sometimes it's not really worth agonizing over accuracy. The 2mm accuracy really becomes irrelevant quickly in the overall scope of the project. And we just patch our pattern up. Put a quick allowance for a close seam for the two pieces of the tongue. Just looks nicer, I think, having a close seam there. And this will become our lining pattern. And often I'll mark lining patterns like that one I did there this is actually the stitch allowance for where it's going to go in. And I've marked it on the lining pattern, not because I want it on the lining pattern, but because I'll probably copy it onto the front part of the tongue pattern, which is going to have this style in it. And then it's just a matter of going through the process, just neatening everything up. And honestly, I've shot myself in the foot and not thought a little bit more about the tongue. Put this sort of square-eared sort of curve on the thing, which ultimately gets lost pretty much when the shoe goes together, but you know, you might as well do a fancy thing while you're in there with the knife and doing stuff. As long as the two centerline lengths are right, you can change everything else on this pattern very easily. The top line can be changed. It's not a big deal at this stage. Put an allowance on. And I'm thinking about what I saw when I took apart my Reebok Pump bringbacks, the originals, which was their lining appeared to be had an allowance of almost a centimetre, and it was what I presume is in excess of what the pump logo was, if that makes sense. And I'm presuming they're doing that so that extra material folds in and gives them a nice pillow line top line. So that's kind of my thinking behind this line, which my memory tells me to do a bit thinner than this. Can we go any faster? This is boring. Alright, so here I'm putting the style onto that, onto the tongue. Run the dividers down there and just sort of round them off. The trick with these is not to get a little pointy bit in there. You notice as soon as I cut it out, I check that to see how pointy it is. And it wasn't too bad. Fits great. So this will become the lining, this will become the front. This lining piece becomes both pieces, I think. I think I kind of stuffed that up when I actually cut it, but we're not cutting the leather yet. So duplicating that for the other part of the lower tongue piece, which again I always like to make this piece in a good textile for breathability. And when you're dealing with textiles, you'll notice that I've left a very big underlay here, and that's just because textiles can fray, and the last thing you want is your textiles fraying. Check it all fits. And although the tongue's the face of the shoe, as far as a development standpoint goes, it's a very forgiving part, and honestly a fun part of making patterns. You get a lot of freedom here. You put all your branding and logos and trendy, sexy stuff on these things, and it's all just to make everything look a bit nicer. And now we're finished, and I've grabbed this leather from a couch I found on the street. Yes, it's couch leather. It's absolutely horrendous leather. It's dry, it's brittle, it's weak, it's got a thick plastic coating which reacts very poorly with the glues I'm using, and it's thin, and it's just, ugh, it's disgusting. You can see that it's already got you can see these little fibers coming out. You expect to see a little bit of that with any leather, but yeah, if you see a lot, it gets bad. It gets bad. It's basically a dry leather. You want a bit of wax or a bit of oils in the leather so that it keeps itself together. But we do find a solution to that later, and one of the solutions is to cut quickly, well, not quickly, but smoothly, so to speak. Try not to stop your cuts midway and do what I'm doing here. That's exactly what you want to avoid at all costs. Obviously, sometimes you can't avoid it, and when you do it, you want to have a sharp knife. Now this piece, I'm not worried about the cutting here. I'm just going quick and rough because it's all underlays. There's no raw edges on that plug. So the only thing that needs to be accurate is the white lines and the registration marks, the prickers that I put in. This is one of the harder pieces. These are a pain in the neck. These little triangle windows inside to cut out are just a nightmare. So I've just freed a couple of pieces and, you know, done it the easiest way possible. And I've even cheated and marked in the cutout, because I am way out of practice. I really haven't practiced cutting like this in years. So yeah, my hands are not really looking forward to this, but I do an okay job. Give myself a 6 out of 10. That bit there gets a bit chewed up as well. Start looking real close at what I'm doing and going slow. Speed this up a little bit more. There's still a lot of cutting to go and it gets pretty dull. It's just cutting. So yeah, pattern cutting's a great job. Once you finish the cutting part, you've got more cutting to do. One of the things that I don't like about this material is I had to liberate it from a couch, which means I didn't get a whole skin. And when you get a whole skin, or you know, a shoulder or a butt or a side, you can just unroll that skin and you can easily see, you know, where the animal's head was, where the animal's backbone was, where the animal's belly is, you know. And for cutting, you need to know all these things, because the direction of the strength of the skin usually follows the bone. So from head to tail along the spine, that leather is going to be nice and stiff, and actually along the back of a cow, along its spine and you know, its back, is where you generally expect to find the best skin on an animal. And then as you get down to the shoulders and the belly, the skin, you know, it gets softer and more wrinklier and looser and, you know, icky. Just not nice to work with. So whenever you pick up leather, you got to look at it as a whole spectrum of material. You know, you try to get your vamps out of the best stuff, so you'll put that right in the back. You might have little back straps or something which are less visible, that you can hide scars in. One of the things you think about when you're putting a piece down is where your underlays are. So this piece, this is an underlay here, so it goes, this bit's going underneath another piece of material, but everything else on it, this is all one raw edge, so I've done it in one nice continuous cut, or at least hopefully one nice continuous cut. And from here to here, again, there's basically one continuous cut to try and get a nice smooth raw edge to this leather. And you know, that's really as much as you can do. Let's just do good neat cutting and practice. God, I did so much cutting when I was working. So the tongue is typically a piece that you can get a bit of rubbish in, because if you think about it, most of the tongue's going to be underneath the rest of the shoe, underneath the laces. So in manufacturing, the clickers, the cutters, the guys that cut the leather all day every day, you know, they've got these skins with all these different sorts of leathers that they've got to use up. And you know, a clicker's bane is, you know, scars in leather and stuff like that. And you know, as a matter of economics, you've got to kind of try and use those, not the scars so much, but you've got to actively use as much leather as possible, put as little on the floor or in the bin as possible. So yeah, I quickly started putting scars in underlays and stuff like that, and just cutting things a little bit closer when underlays were being impinged. You know, instead of bringing that underlay level, I'd just go over a mil or two and save the guy a couple $100 over the course of a year or something, maybe. But I mean, none of these materials are particularly cheap, and you know, you really have to not be precious with them to actually hack through them like this and be efficient with them. So yeah. So getting the linings out, cut the last few bits out, and when I finished cutting everything out, there's a pause in this video of about a day where I basically got on the computer and started 3D modeling stuff for this thing. Once I start skiving this stuff, it becomes very apparent to me that I'm going to have massive problems with this material. It is really substandard as far as strength goes, and it's, you know, I'm really starting to panic that it's just going to fall apart in my hands as I work it. But I haven't realised that. I'm still... Alright, I think I've finished cutting most of it out now, and I'm just going through all the pieces one more time, double checking marks because I left a lot of markers out. And honestly, some of these marks you don't need. If I was prepping this pattern for press knives, a lot of these marked out things, I'd just put a few prickers in, a couple of edge markers, like these are edge markers here, or they would be, and you just put it in the knife and that'd be an exit, that'd be exit edge markers basically. So here I'm sharpening off my knife, and this is why I use these snap-off knife blades most of the time, because yeah, I don't have to spend 10 minutes sharpening the darn things. And here you can see what I'm talking about this leather being really just rubbish. It's coming apart like powder here. I do an okay job of skiving it here, but as you can see, I can't do anything fancy. I can just sort of take the corner off, which is all you really need to do. This material's really thin. But yeah, my habit is to be using stuff a bit thicker than this. So yeah, I'd prefer to be using a 1.8mm leather rather than this. So we're adapting on the fly here and just taking the very minimal bit of rubbish off, and trying to do it neatly and evenly as well. And you know, there's a few pieces to go through. Knives are pretty fun. Choppy choppy choppy. Gee whiz, how much more of this is there? Yeah, look at me go. Yeah, my hands are kind of tired. So this is where that extra day was. I've printed out these red things and I'm just adjusting my pattern to fit. And whenever I do these sort of inserts, I intentionally make the pattern a little smaller than the actual insert, because when you stitch an insert, the sewing machine will actually stretch that leather a bit. So having this a little small is actually kind of what you want. But yeah, when I actually go to put it together, it's a little bit too tight, but you know, I make it work. So one of the really cool things about this 3D printer is, well, you can do things I've never seen in footwear before. And this is not exciting, like, you know, Adidas, Bloomin' 3D printed soles and units or stuff, but there's a thing called piping, which is kind of what I'm about to replicate in a minute. But the way this red sort of has a wall, that's basically imitating a thing that we call piping. And it's called piping because you sort of make a pipe out of the material. You typically make it by grabbing whatever material you want, usually something sexy, and putting a string in it and then folding the material over the string. You can then just put that along a raw edge, and it just gives a trendy, you know, piping to an edge. And I'm basically doing that here, except this wall that I've made is like 1/2 millimeter, and you could not do that any way, shape or form that I can think of in footwear in any traditional way without, you know, injection molding stuff. So I'm going to call this red thing here my new invention, because it's basically a trough. It's not piping, it's an edge, it's not an edge treatment. It's basically, it's a pig trough. It's a slop trough. The benefit of it is that this squishy leather, as you can see, I just squish it into that trough and then hammer it down, and that slop looks beautiful. Pardon me. So yeah, I printed a few of these things out because yeah, this material is really bugging me, and I had this idea of just backing everything with 3D printed TPU a while ago. I've been loath to do it because it takes a bit of while to actually, you know, it took me over a day to do all this stuff on the computer, so you know, it's a bit of time. The prints actually print pretty quick. Because they're so thin, you know, most of these things, I think this one to print the collar left and right took about 4 hours or something like that. But yeah, they print really quick, which is good. And again, you can see that my leather's a little bit small, like the hole here is a bit small, so I have to force the leather in there. And again, that's partly by design. It is a fraction tight in places, but even that is working to my advantage, because it's turned those sloppy edges, you know, basically really nice. I've missed it a bit here. And, you know, that's a finish I've never seen on a shoe before. It's not vastly different, but hey. If you invent something, you get to name it. I'm calling these pig troughs. And of course, what I'm doing here is holding where that wall of my pig trough stops, because that has double duty as a marking, an alignment point, which is kind of convenient. And the white marker that I've put here is rubbed off, which is the downside. But here you can see some of the glue's got onto the crust of the leather, and this is where I first noticed that, oh gee, this leather doesn't actually like my glue. It's gonna melt. That's not good. So that's a thing. So printing TPU for these two colours is a bit problematic. There's a lot of stringing and contamination, but you know, it's sort of there. And it's already starting to look like a cheap Kmart jobby. But anyway, now we are on to the sewing machine, obviously. And I've hooked up my endoscope because, well, why not? Let's have a second camera angle. That's fancy, isn't it? Except my clapperboard, this is where I say, yeah, I haven't learned how to use my clapperboard because, yeah, I wasn't able to sync this footage up. So, yeah, this might be a little difficult to watch. But, you know, we stick things together, we put them under the machine, we line them up, and then we try to stitch as neatly and as consistently as possible. And this bloomin' foot here, I hate this foot, man. It's just, it's covering its work, it's hiding its work underneath this foot, and I cannot see for the life of me where I'm going. I'm starting to get used to it, and I even surprised myself. This turns out relatively decent, but if you look here, you can see how bad it really is. It's really walking away. What I'm looking at is the space, how much leather is visible. So here we're fine, and then we start to come out. We've got lots of leather here that's not good, and then we come in. So yeah, but I surprised myself. I managed to hit the other seam hit the beginning of the stitch pretty seamlessly, which is really surprising. And yeah, I guess we hit the fast forward while we stitch the heck out of this thing, because for the most part it's just stitch, stitch, stitch. I look almost competent in high speed. Pretty sexy. So when I do have raw edges, it's pretty obvious the difference, at least to me. I don't know, it might not come through on the camera very well, I think, but yeah, they're pretty obviously, these pig trenches, pig troughs are really good for, you know, hiding bad leather. I do think the red is a bit overpowering though. Reminds me of like the Batmobile, like the old 70s or 60s Batmobile, the Adam West era. Yeah, we just keep stitching and stitching, and one part after another, just keep going. So one of the big flaws in this upper so far is because the two collar pieces are not connected in any real way, if you were to wear this one as is, yeah, you'd quickly blast through that. Which is why the original had a backstrap down the back. And honestly, the way I did the backstrap, I copied from the way Reebok did their Battleground blacktops. It had a backstrap which, well, when it came out when I was a kid, I'd never seen anything like that before. I thought it looked cool. It sort of had the backstrap going into the lining, and although this shoe ultimately doesn't have a bag top lining like most joggers do, this has got a raw edged lining. I originally did it the same way, put a nice roll on it, but yeah, haven't done any of that here. I'm gonna have to, I'm thinking about 3D printing something. Don't really want to go out and buy a whole roll of flipping tape just to do one pair of shoes. And if I 3D print it, well, I can make it look sexy, I don't know, put the logo on it. Been thinking about the logo. But yeah, there's a lot of influences from a lot of different shoes in this actually. The triangular top line, general shape of the top line is very Shaq, what was it, Shaq 2s I think they were, had that, inspired that sort of triangular, yeah, this sort of triangular bar shape. But it also comes a bit from those Nike Hirachis, I think they're called. They were pretty cool. Good inspiration. And the Vamp was a little bit inspired by one of the other blacktop models. I can't remember the name. But yeah, the way the Vamp, or the Vamp and the first eyelets in one of the blacktops was very similar, or at least this is a derivation on that, if that makes sense. But yeah, although they're inspired from those things, they're not the same. I haven't just copied the top line, and this sort of thing in the middle here, this triangular donut thing, I don't know what you want to call it, this thing here is not something I've seen anywhere else. So most of the shoes, just all me. Default. So here we're stitching the mudguard on to the plug to create our Vamp, and it looks like our side footage is way out of sync, but anyway. Yeah, great editing, Gaz, well done. But anyway, as you see, you just sort of follow the line, and as you get around the corner, it gets harder, and you just take it slower and nibble your way around. And other than just doing this a whole bunch of times, there's no real easy way to tell people how to do this other than you take your time and you sort of, yeah, it's just sort of a thing you got to do. It's weird. But yeah, this one turned out really well. I'm surprised how well it turned out. I was expecting it to be an absolute shambles, but yeah, you know, that's why I shoot from the hip. Anyway, I'll speed this up a bit. The work is so interesting. It deserves to be played at like 50 times normal speed. And of course, as I got to the end there, I was really happy because my markings lined up really well. And I just pull it in the right way to see what it actually looked like. And at this point, if I had done a bad job, Here we go, I think our sight, if I had done a bad job, I wouldn't have bothered putting a second stitch in there. But I was pretty chuffed with how it looked. It was pretty neat, you know, at least as good as any Reebok, at least as good as the worst Reeboks you might get. And so I did a victory lap. So we got a double stitch down the toe. And I didn't really do a great job of that, but I didn't do a terrible job either. Again, I can't see what I'm doing in here. This foot is just blinding me. And of course we never use machines with this sort of feet, this sort of foot in the factory, so yeah. So in the little endoscope camera here, you can sort of see how, you can just see, I'll stop getting that I'm covering the alignment marks and actually going a little bit past it. The whole idea of these alignment marks is to, when you sew them, that you've covered them and you don't have to clean them up, you know. That way you don't create more work for yourself, you know. If you do this badly, you've got to go around with a rubber and clean all these white lines up, and that's just zick. And if you're going to pass this on to a factory to make 100,000 pairs of, you know, they ain't going to be interested in doing that. So half of your job is eliminating work, or excess, unnecessary work. Faster, faster, faster. And I wish I had put a big trough on this piece too, because this would have benefited from it. Even if it was just around the closure, the lace point here, would have done really good. Faster, faster, faster. And again, this is a nice easy stitch, which is just refreshing at this point. So I do another victory lap. So yeah, I do avoid double stitching perhaps too much, but yeah, that's because it's all too easy to make one good stitch look like two really bad stitches. So I've sort of picked me battles on this one, but by default I do prefer a double stitch. So here we go, victory lap. Yeah. And I really am starting to get a bit more of a feel for this sewing machine. But not being able to see where that needle's going into the material is really not my thing. I've got to get a wheeled foot machine. So what are we doing? We're putting lining on the vamp. So here we can see what I've done here is I've just cut our lining straight, and so this is basically a trim off allowance in here, which I kind of need to align this sort of somehow. I could put little wings on it and align it with the lasting allowance, but that's extra material. This material is going to be thrown out on the floor anyway, so I might as well put it in the pattern and it can serve a function before it gets trimmed out and thrown on the floor. Faster, faster, faster. Come on, get to the lasting. This is a terrible camera angle, can't see anything. So I'm trimming out that allowance that I was just talking about. It's kind of hard to do trim outs. I don't have a proper pair of scissors, and yeah, every time I try and do it in front of the camera there's no lighting. go around there with a cigarette lighter and melt some of the edges. This stuff melts really well. And the threads, you can melt the threads too. Now we're attaching the first vamp attachment point. And of course this pattern I've got lots of stop and starts to go down, so we zip that in. And it's actually a surprisingly convenient place to close a shoe, which we're going to do in the next stitch. Okay, that's that stitch we just made. Nice and close. We go around. So you can see just how much distortion goes on during, you know, stitching here. And that distortion is kind of always in the back of my head. You know, if I'm being inaccurate, is it going to be gobbled up with that distortion? Is it going to be hidden? Is it going to make it worse? So I think this is our closure stitch, final stitch at the upper. It's always a bit tricky, but yeah, no, we've nailed it. And we're done, I think. No, we've still got to put the tongue in. Finish closing the tongue. And then stitch the tongue in. You know, looking back, I should have stitched the tongue in before I closed the whole shoe. Would have made stitching it in a lot easier. So I'll have to remember that for next time. Because as you can see, the sheer bulk of material going on here just makes everything a pain in the neck. And ideally I'd like to put a really nice solid, like really go around most of this, but I can't, because I just can't see where this machine is, where this foot is. So I jiggle it and jiggle it and jiggle it and jiggle it, and at some point I just force the thing in. What am I doing here? I think I'm trimming stuff. So this looks like the first time I lined up the tongue. I'm not actually stitching. And then here we're actually stitching. And so I've only really completed that crescent just barely enough, really. It'll hold, the shoe's not going to be worn, so yeah. But yeah, that is a major problem. And I'm just chucking it on the last to see if it fits. And I'm pretty blown away, it fits pretty well. I've still got to punch the eyelets, so can't last it properly yet, but just had a look. Rah, faster, faster, faster. Come on, this is all done. What happens next? I'll play around with the last a little bit more. I'm actually pretty blown away at this point. Everything looks pretty snug, looks pretty spot on, and well, that's just great, isn't it? You know, it's really great. It's starting to look okay. to the next one. Come on. So we come in and we glue everything up. I got a strip of leather that I've used about 6 times already for heel counters and toe puffs, sorry. So I'm going to reuse this just to give us a toe puff. So yeah, gluing's fun. Roll the glue on and then spread it out evenly. Try not to get anywhere you don't want any. I put a bit of extra glue up underneath this seam allowance because I want all this leather to be molded and behave in, you know, a predictable way. So by gluing them together, the two pieces act as one, and then gluing the heel count, the toe puff in there as well. It just saves me having to mess around with it and align it later. It's not a proper pattern, so it's a terrible toe puff, but I just want to get a bit of substance in there, and I'm just sort of test fitting to make sure. We've put our holes in for our eyelets, and we've put the brightest, ugliest, filthiest shoelace in there. Whenever you're like lasting an upper, you really should put your shoelaces in, because otherwise it's too easy to pull it too much on the sides. And I'm only gluing the outside of the heel counter here. This is really not my favourite way of doing heel counters. This is basically a pre-molded counter, although I 3D printed it, so it's not technically pre-molded, but whatever. And so I just have to stick it in there roughly where I think it is. I've got nothing to really align with. I've just got to guess and go, yeah. And again, I'm reusing another piece of leather that would otherwise go in the rubbish bin. As you can see, I cut this out ages ago, and I cut it out absolutely hideously. It doesn't match at all. So I'm using it now, so I don't have to ever worry about wanting to use it ever again. It shouldn't have any impact. It's only a millimetre thick. Standard insole boards are at least pushing 2 millimeters thick, and in a factory, a proper footwear manufacturing for cement lasted shoes, not welts, you'll use that bulk and sharp corner of the insole board to actually form your feather line in your upper. But we're not really doing that, and this material is not heavy enough or strong enough to do that, so I've got to rely on the last for the shape anyway. Plus it's a sneaker with all this lining, which is, the lining is actually, it's not laminated like you'd usually see, but it's, you know, it's a 2-3 millimeter thick sort of spongy lining, so it does have some thickness, which just makes everything sort of soft and squishy over the feather line, which can be a bit of an issue, but you know, we're making this by hand, we can deal with those as they come along. We just glue. In the next video we'll change camera angles, and is it the next video? No, we're going to play around here for another video. So the glue's dried now. I've pulled the toe of the lining in just to get it to stay somewhere, and the back lining is just sitting where it wants to sit at the moment. I haven't really done anything. And again, because the vamp has this mudguard and the plug, it's a very good tight fit. Everything's just gonna last like nothing. You know, just tidying up the toe puff, you know, putting a bit of extra glue, because yeah, all that material, you know, material doesn't stick to material unless it's got glue in it, and you know, there's a big hole in there otherwise. So, get in there, more glue. More glue. Look at that. Stuff smells wonderfully. And I've got 2 glues. I've got 2. This one's, the yellow one's basically for these sort of leathery materials. and I've got a clear one which is for like synthetics, like plastics and whatnot. So if you're wondering why sometimes I use a clear glue and sometimes I'm using a yellow glue, that's basically why. I could theoretically get a third glue for less structural things, but yeah, whatever. I don't use much glue. Yeah, and I'm just grabbing the biggest bit to try and get it basically straight. This is about the one process where I'm really glad I'm using cheap soft leather, because I'm not that good at of a laster, not by hand anyway. I did alright when I was toe lasting with the actual hydraulic toe lasters, but yeah, this stuff is tough if you're doing like with proper boot leather. And honestly, the real hard thing about this, the pattern's actually going down really nicely. You, you will notice that this piece here, because there's no pig trough, it's not in a pig trough, it's just a piece of leather, and the back piece, that I get a bit of rubbish going on in the back that I don't even try to get out, because, well, if this material's too soft, you can't just keep pulling it and keep pulling it like a proper shoe. You gotta make compromises, and you know, so I hit it some more. But yeah, I've done a bit of a better job at aligning it than the last couple that I've lasted up. And of course, every time I do this, I'm always trying to remember how it went last time, and you know, did this work last time, and what didn't work. And that's the twist, that's the magic twist. That little twist there was where I basically set it as best I could. Just heat it up and give it a good slump. I kind of like these pincers. They got a really skinny head, which I was a bit worried to be just ripping the crap out of everything, but it hasn't ripped anything yet. I remember when I was learning how to do this by hand, the only pincers that they had available had heads here that were at least a centimetre. This is almost like 2 mil, I don't know. It's really skinny. But yeah, a lot of the students sort of really looked at our pincers and went, can't we get them a bit thinner? But yeah, one of the big differences between what I'm doing here is because everything's so light and soft, it's just really easy. It looks like I'm busting a nut, but you know, it's as far as compared to doing a real shoe, this is easy. This is walk in the park. Tap tap, done. Yeah. Again, just checking how things are. Tongue's sitting a little low and it's starting to worry me, and the back is riding down a little bit, which is also starting to worry me. But it's really, if I had had these last two pieces in these pig troughs, she'd be right. Actually, it wouldn't, because the reason this one, the back piece especially, is not in a pig trough is because this curve would probably, like the TPU pig trough would not take that curve too much. It's too much of a compound curve. But yeah, we're pretty much done. And of course I don't have to worry about the lining underneath because I know it's already straight, because I've made sure that the only way I could do the rest of this is by having that straight. And when the shoe comes off the last, that lining, because it's not actually glued, it actually collapses in a little bit, so that when you look down there, the lining is, without a lie, just like as smooth as a baby's bottom. There is not a crease, a wrinkle, or anything in that lining. It's beautiful on the inside. So whenever you finish lasting, you always give it a bit of a bash, and then you run it through the heat setter to set everything and give it a bit of a shrink. I don't have a heat setter here, so I just sit this thing aside for a couple of days to let that leather toe puff dry, and then I take it off the last. What am I doing here? Am I loosening or tightening? Just adjusting the tongue a little bit. Anyway, what do you think, fellas? I'd give it, no, I don't know, say 6.5 out of 10. And of course, this is my vintage one from 20 plus years ago. I think it looks way better. You see how my little triangle here is a lot smaller and neater. You've got the back strap on the back. You've even got an attempt at a sole. But yeah, they're pretty cool. There we go, fellas. Well, that's a wrap. I will catch you later.